Well, welcome back. We are the Law and Crime Network. I am Linda Kenny Bodden, and this is the afternoon session. And boy, do we have a docket for you coming up, and guests that you will not believe, and you will have to stay tuned to find out who they are. But right now, let me just do a little bit of a recap. There is jury selection in the case of Florida, where Granville Ritchie is being accused of killing, murdering, raping a 9-year-old girl who was later found floating in the water. That case is in jury selection. As soon as it goes live, we will go live for opening statements. And then we are following the case in South Carolina of Sidney Moore, who was accused of killing his former girlfriend, a woman he had a lover's triangle, an affair with, who obviously really loved him. Heather Elvis, she went missing in 2013, almost 6 years ago. Sidney's wife, Tammy, was convicted of kidnapping her. They have never found the body, so there is no murder charge right now. And the question is, will Sidney, who faces the same charges, be convicted? You can go to the Law and Crime website and watch that trial live. And then the case we have been covering for the last 2 weeks in Ohio, Skylar Richardson, who was 18 years old at the time the state said she murdered her newborn infant, a little baby that the state says was born alive, the defense says was a stillbirth. We have been following testimony all day regarding this, and we will play some of that testimony. But right now, we want to play you a clip from her interview with the police when she was asked about burying her child. So
you decide you got to bury her. How did you even think about that? Did you know where you would bury her?
I just wanted to bury her in my backyard so we could put flowers on her.
Okay. Kleenex or anything?
No, it's okay.
Can she grab a Kleenex? Are you sure? Well, just let us anyhow. Yeah, we are, and I know I feel bad because I'm making you talk about like the worst parts of it now, and
do I get to go home still?
What's that?
Do I still get to go?
We're going to talk to him. Yes, we're still trying to figure out exactly. So what happened?
I'm sorry.
So, okay, Skylar, she's Kate, your Skylar. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize, okay? Like I said, I mean, I hope you believe me. I'm telling you the truth about my daughter and everything. So I've seen her go through this, so I know you're going through a horrible thing, and you've had to do it all by yourself. So you wanted to bury her in the backyard again and do flowers. So is that what you did? How did you take us through that? So what did you do? Did you bury her immediately?
I tried to, but soon after.
Okay, so what did you do with her when you got ready to go down and I guess maybe look for a shovel or whatever you'd need? Where did you put her?
I had her with me.
You had her with you? In a towel? Okay. Did you end up burying her at your house? Okay. Was the shovel or whatever you used, was it at your house?
Yeah.
Okay. So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a shovel?
I have my garage.
Okay. What did you find, or what did you use?
I just got a shovel, and I just put a little hole in my backyard and put her in it.
Okay, I understand. What did you do? Did you have, and you didn't have any help, right? Okay.
And she was interviewed several times, but in the second interview, she was also asked about burning, not burying, burning the baby and whether she did it. I want you to listen very carefully, because later on today, we will have on this show a wrongful confession expert, and this clip will be very important to what he tells us.
Fire.
What fire?
Well, there's some evidence to show that there was some burning on her.
Didn't burn her? I promise on anything I didn't burn her. My dad has lots of bonfires, but I didn't burn her.
There was some charring and stuff on some of her bones, so.
I didn't burn her.
Are you sure?
I swear on anything.
You're sure?
That I'm sure of. I'm sure of.
You didn't did you burn anything around her? Did you try to maybe melt the dirt or anything? Was there any reason for any of that?
No, and I did nothing with fire. Nothing.
Is it possible originally you put her in the fire pit before you?
No.
I don't mean with a lit fire, but I mean put her in the fire pit.
No.
What about, okay, maybe not fire, like what about like some other heat source? Was there any heat involved in anything? This was been after she was dead, so it's not like
No.
no microwaves, no oven, no nothing. Like there's
You're so close. Just give us all the truth
And
that's
I
left.
giving you all the truth. I told you about squeeze treatment. I think that it might have hurt her, but that I'm
I think it's not. Did you maybe put some, like after she was in the ground, like maybe some fire there, or some,
I took flowers from the fire pit.
but that wouldn't burn the bones unless they were on fire.
Not that. You're so close, Skylar. You know, just
We know there was some sort of fire. I know it's.
And I understand
that she was probably alive just a little bit.
maybe I thought I saw her chest as I was cleaning up, and I don't know if I.
And I'm not trying to get you to say maybes or anything. Just please share the truth with us.
Why did she let a noise?
Maybe what kind of noise?
Maybe a little noise, a girl, but I didn't know if it was something else, like and then I didn't hear another one.
Another one? Okay, which is natural, because that's what, I mean, again, I'm not a mom, but I've been in the delivery room for 4 of them, and there's like kind of a gurgle sound, and the doctors will suction out, you know, that stuff.
I didn't hear it again.
I'm sorry?
And I didn't hear it again.
Okay.
Was that like when she was in the toilet, or was that when you were sleeping?
I think. And that was when she was in the toilet. I might have moved, but I didn't look right away. I was like in shock. I
understand.
Yeah, a baby just fell out of you.
I saw her arm maybe a little, but moving on. No one missing it.
Was that also when she was in the toilet, or was that?
Yeah, I think. Get a picture of it.
Well, that was the important interview that may be important for a number of reasons the defense contends, because they contend this was a false confession. Let me introduce my guest for today, starting with in the studio here, Anthony Tall, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And you try cases, you represent sports figures. You are, I've been reading your sites. It's unbelievable everything you do. Thank you for being on with me again. A pleasure to have you here. And we'll be with you in a bit.
Okay.
And then, of course, Judge Ashley Wilcott, you know her well from Georgia. Judge, how are you? You are my font of information when it comes to anything regarding any trial that has to do with any child, baby, juvenile, anything. Thank you, Ashley, for being on, one of my favorite guests of all times.
Thank you, Linda. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and of course, my forensic pathologist for the day, Dr. Jamie Downs, who has been the head forensic pathologist in 2 different states, is one of the fountains of information that I go to when I can't use my husband because of some kind of conflict of interest, or maybe because he's in Poland or across the seas. Jamie, I love you, but not as much as Michael.
I certainly understand that, and the feeling is mutual. Good to see you, Linda.
Nice seeing you. Now, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Downs. There's been the big bone of contention in this case is, has the state proven how this child has died? The defense contends it was a stillbirth. I had an expert on here yesterday who said it was either a stillbirth or an unsurvivable child. In other words, it would live for a second or 2, but not breathing, and then die. You are the forensic pathologist in this case. Don't you want to do a forensic pathology examination to confirm whether or not what a defendant is telling the attorney, not the attorneys, but the police, may be the truth?
Well, as a forensic pathologist, your first mission is to be objective and to gather evidence, whatever that evidence is and wherever it might take you. So I would personally want to not only do an examination of the remains, but I would do an autopsy of the scene. I learned a long time ago from one of the greats in our field, Joe Davis, in Miami, that everything begins at the scene. So that's where it needs to start.
Well, here they went to the police to a forensic anthropologist because there were bones, and as you and I both know, the anthropologists deal with bones, not necessarily tissue, okay? And the forensic anthropologist made a fatal mistake of the bones were burned, and therefore the police went off on this tangent. How does that affect you as a forensic pathologist in coming up with the cause of death?
Burning of bones doesn't really affect me in terms of cause of death. I would want to see the remains for myself. And you have to remember that because you have skeletal remains, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cause of death was burning or the burning happened immediately after death. In fact, I would expect flesh remains not to burn down to bone necessarily. A small set of remains, like a newborn child's remains, should burn rather easily if there actually is burn damage.
So, Dr. Downs, we'll continue this discussion, and we're going to bring my other two guests into it. But basically what I think I just heard you say is that you really want to see for yourself and come to a conclusion for yourself on something that's not contaminated. Let's go to a break, and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is legal news you can use. So we all hit a rough patch at one point or another. There's no shame in admitting that. Many times it concerns money, and maybe you're having trouble staying afloat. So our topic today is, when should you consider filing for bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is for those who can't fulfill their financial obligations and need a do-over. But bankruptcy is reserved for only those extreme situations, and a court is going to look at the following. You've tried but failed to work out a settlement with your creditors. You've turned to consumer credit counseling, but it hasn't resulted in a solution. A court ordered that your wages be seized or garnished to satisfy your debts. You have outstanding medical bills that you just can't pay. You either don't have assets or not enough to pay off your debts, or your savings account, if you have one, is not going to help either. Okay, so you want to declare bankruptcy, but which kind? There are two that apply to individuals. Chapter 7, where your assets that can be sold off by a court will be in order to pay off your debts. This includes clothing, jewelry, artwork, or property. Or Chapter 13. Now, this option's better for people who have a steady income, because here you just reorganize your debts and develop a plan to pay back over time. There are a lot of advantages to filing for bankruptcy. Namely, your creditors will stop coming after you, and in certain cases, you won't have to repay some of your debt at all. But remember, bankruptcy can seriously hurt your credit score, and it doesn't relieve you of having to pay specific debts like alimony, taxes, child support, or mortgage payments. So before you file, consult with an attorney first. For more legal news you can use, go to longcrime.com.
Hi there. You might wonder what a famous Hollywood celebrity like me is doing reading in the dark. Is this some new sort of Hollywood method acting? No, this is quite real.
Did you know that Americans use about 4 times as much energy per year as the global average? We waste energy left and right, despite the fact that the dirty fossil fuels we use to power our energy sources wreak havoc on the natural world and destroys valuable wildlife habitats.
By reading with my solar-powered night vision goggles, I'm saving energy and looking sleek.
You don't have to sit in the dark like Ed Begley Jr. to save the world. Fight climate change by speaking up for cleaner, smarter energy, including rooftop solar.
Oh, that's way better. Oh.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.
Both my legs were amputated due to an IED. It's when you start to try to get back into like an everyday life. I absolutely felt like I lost some of my purpose. There must be something more. When DAV came into my life, they gave me a new mission. I could still be a productive member of society, could still support a family.
The DAV gave him that sense of structure and purpose again to get his life back together.
Visit DAV.org to learn more about our mission.
Crime Network. So now we're going to listen to, since we have our forensic pathologist here as a guest, Dr. Susan Brown. She was the forensic pathologist for the state in the Skylar Richardson case, and she came up with a conclusion of cause of death unknown and manner of death homicide. Let's listen to how she got there.
Doctor, when you reviewed the statements of the defendant in this case, were there statements that she made that were significant to you in helping you to make a determination as to cause of death in this case?
Yes.
And if you will, what were the statements that she made that you found to be relevant?
The statements during the police interview were statements about sounds that the baby had made, gurgling, crying, movement, all signs of life.
Was it relevant to you that she had indicated that she thought she might have killed her baby?
Yes.
That she might have killed her baby when she squeezed it too hard?
Yes.
That her baby was alive for about 5 minutes?
Yes.
That her baby was alive before she squeezed her?
I object to the direct.
I'll sustain the objection as to the form of the questions.
Have you ever had an experience where a deceased infant cries,
No.
gurgles,
No.
breathes,
No.
moves?
No.
Was it concerning to you when you were considering all of the information and trying to reach your opinion on cause of death that she indicated that she may have tried to cremate her child?
Yes.
How so?
It indicates, along with the other scene information, of a deliberate attempt to try to hide or conceal the infant.
Doctor, the scene information that was provided to you regarding the backyard burial, did that factor into your opinion as to cause of death?
Yes, again, it's a deliberate attempt to hide the baby.
Doctor, based upon your education, training, and experience as a forensic pathologist, and based upon your autopsy of baby Richardson, do you have an opinion within a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause of baby Richardson's death?
Yes.
And can you please state your opinion?
Homicidal violence of undetermined etiology.
And can you please explain your opinion to the jury?
So looking at all of the information, the scene, the police interview, the evaluation by the anthropologist, my autopsy evaluation, all of the evidence points to a homicide, but the exact cause of the homicide, the exact cause of death, can't be determined.
Okay, so to me this is very troubling, Judge Wilcox, especially when the state has the burden of proof. Your forensic pathologist says, well, I looked at all of her statements, which we know may be contaminated, may be a false confession, and given everything, I came up with the conclusion that it's homicide by violence, but I don't know what from. Are you bothered as I am?
Sure, because you want to hear a cause of death, right? And you would think if a prosecution's going to try a case that they're able to say through an expert what the cause of death was. Well, she specifically just said the opposite. I don't know what the cause of death is, but I do know it was, the exact cause, but I'm going to conclude it was homicidal violence. That's a big point for the prosecution, for the jury.
A big point for the prosecution, Anthony, with the judges say big point in problem, big point, yeah. I see problem. What do you say?
Yeah, I say the same thing. I don't see how she can make that jump. First of all, she's a forensic expert and she's basing something on statements and linguistics. So that's a problem right there. And secondly, she's saying, looking at all the evidence, the fact that there was evidence that she tried to conceal it. People try to conceal things for a whole bunch of reasons. Guilt, shame, maybe she felt a little guilty. That does not point to her committing a homicide. So as a defense attorney, usually what you have to do in these situations, you take a molehill and you make a mountain out of it. That's one of these molehills that she gives that we can make a big mountain and go miles and miles with that. She did not give an actual determination as a forensic expert as to the cause of death. That's huge.
Well, let's see what the defense expert forensic pathologist, Dr. Levon, said earlier today.
Now, at my request, Dr. Levon, you're here today to give us your opinions based upon your examination of the remains of Annabelle Richardson and other materials. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And before we get into the basis of your opinion, based on your education, experience, and background, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to the cause and manner of death of Annabelle Richardson?
Yes, sir, I do.
And could you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that opinion is?
In my opinion, the cause of death of Annabelle is undetermined. And in my opinion, the manner of death of Annabelle is undetermined.
Now, if you would, Could you read that portion of the report, the bottom part? I'm just learning how to use this, so this portion right here, could you read that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, because this is your opinion?
Yes, sir. After review of the above documentation and examination of the skeletal remains, it is my opinion that 1, the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of thermal injury. 2, the skeletal remains showed no identifiable evidence of violent traumatic injury. Number 3, due to the advanced state of decomposition and lack of soft tissue for examination, there is absolutely no identifiable evidence of live birth. Number 4, because of the lack of identifiable violent injury and the lack of evidence of live birth, it is incorrect to state that this child died of homicidal violence of undetermined etiology.
And when you say it is incorrect to state that this child died of homicidal violence, you're referring to what Dr. Allen testified to here a few days ago, is that correct?
I'm referring to the opinion in her report. The reason my opinion is the cause of death is undetermined is because there is, in my opinion, after examination of the remains, there is no identifiable evidence of any cause of death, let alone any traumatic cause of death. There's no evidence of the child was alive at birth. And the manner of death, in my opinion, is undetermined because there's no evidence of, and mainly it's based on the fact there's no other available portion of the child to examine. We were only able to examine bones. So the child, it's not possible to say that the child died of a natural death. It's not possible to say that the child committed suicide. It's not possible to say that the child died of an accident. In my opinion, it's not possible to say that the child died of the manner of death is homicide. So of the 5 manners of death, if you cannot assign a manner of death, one of the 4 I just mentioned, then the manner of death, in my opinion, must be listed as undetermined. And undetermined doesn't mean that anything was done incorrectly. It just means that there isn't enough information to choose one of the other 4 manners.
Is there evidence that any evidence that the child was born alive?
In my opinion, no.
Well, that's Dr. Levon saying he can't determine a cause or manner of death. But I just want you to note something when we talk about false confessions. There, Mr. Rickers, Sr., asked him, did you have an opinion that was different, basically, than Dr. Allen? And then the witness, who is an expert, adopts it and said, yeah, my opinion is different. I want to let you know that they were talking about Dr. Susan Brown, who was the forensic pathologist. So if you want to know how false confessions happen and think people adopt things that people say, that was a good example. Anyhow, Dr. Jamie Downs, I do know your name. Medical certainty, reasonable degree. I find that a troubling fact anymore, because what is medical certainty if you're relying on people's confessions that may be wrong, or statements, or what the police tell you?
As a physician, our first tool is history. It would be malpractice to ignore history. Part of that is statements. But you also, when you're listening to a statement, you have to consider what the individual said and were there leading questions, and also you have to be very careful not to hear what you want to hear. I remember a homicide case I had here locally where the police insisted that the victim said before she died that she had seen herself shot in the stomach. Actually, that's not what happened.
Dr.
What
Downs,
happened was,
You are a fount of information based on your history, and I know that next week when we watch the Granville Ritchie case, we may be seeing you, I gather, as a witness for maybe the prosecution, maybe the defense. I don't know yet. We'll find out soon. But I really want to thank you for whatever you do whenever you come on and give us your knowledge. Let me ask Judge Wilcott, if you have Dr. Downs on the stand, and Dr. Downs is asked about medical scientific certainty and then talks about history and what other police officers told him, would you then be susceptible, let's say, to a defense motion to strike his opinion?
No, I mean, I wouldn't. And sometimes I've seen some do that, but honestly, because he's relying on that history, because his expert testimony is really not that different from the state's expert, I wouldn't. I would let it go. I just don't think that type of motion is going to be won in this particular case because they relied on everything that was at their disposal, everything that they could rely on, Linda.
Anthony Tall, so you are defending this case and you have these two expert opinions, but they both say they can't determine the cause of death. Why is your doctor more important to the jury, because you have to explain that he is, than the state's doctor?
Because I don't have the burden of proof. The prosecutor has the burden of proof. If my guy is saying it's uncertain, she's saying it's uncertain, so we're both at uncertainty. They have a burden of proof to a high degree, beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm just saying it's up in the air, and if you're going to convict this young, pretty girl, you're going to need some evidence that's pretty certain in a case like this.
Well,
I've done these cases. I've had young girls, and when they're young, it's hard to prosecute them.
Well, we're going to see about that. Dr. Downs, I really want to thank you for joining us for this half hour. I hope that we have a longer time with you, and I hope that you will come back after the Granville Ritchie case on the Law and Crime Network. We have to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be doing more about this case, and we have an expert in false confessions, a real expert who was a victim of one. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber, and this is more legal news you can use. Listen, I don't have to tell you that breakups can get complicated. Who gets the dog? What happens to the pictures? Do you delete the person off social media? But one of the most important issues, what happens if you share a bank account with your ex who just took out all the money? Let's discuss your options. By law, joint owners of a bank account each have a right to the funds. So technically, your ex could empty the whole account, even if you're the one who put the money there in the first place. Instead, think about requiring multiple signatures for withdrawals or having each person only own part of the account. But in the case of marriage, the law may help you. Yes, your ex, prior to divorce, may have the right to empty the whole joint account, but that doesn't mean he or she is off the hook. A court could order your ex to reimburse you a portion if it was taken out for improper purposes. This could be seen as dissipation or wasting of marital assets, and your ex may have to pay attorney's fees and costs associated with collecting. Also, his or her share of the marital property could be negatively adjusted. Oh, and shocker, courts aren't going to look too favorably on the person that spent that money on a mistress or paramour. Oh, and if your ex empties an account after divorce papers are filed, he or she may be in serious trouble because a court sometimes orders that no withdrawals can be made once the divorce process starts. Not all's fair in love, war, and money. Go to lawandcrime.com for more legal news you can use.
Can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me something. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you, your real friends won't care. Deal?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
My name is Sam Leitch. About a year ago, I had a heart transplant. My life was saved on the last day that I was supposed to be on this planet. I don't know who my donor was, but that person saved my life. And now I know what a miracle feels like. It feels terrific. Having a new heart's given me time to spend more time with my loved ones, watching them grow up. That new heart gave me a new mission in life, and that is to get others to sign up to be organ and tissue donors. The most common thing I hear when I ask people why they haven't signed up is, "I don't know, I just haven't thought about it." Well, why don't you think about it? Think about the life you might save or the life you might enhance. Over 130 million people have already signed up to be an organ, eye, or tissue donor. They're men and women, all ages, all races, and they have one thing in common. They want to save lives. Please sign up to be an organ, eye, and tissue donor. You don't want to miss your chance to save a life.
Do you know the signs of a brain aneurysm? The worst headache of your life? Pain behind one eye? Dizziness or blurry vision? Don't ignore it. Seek immediate emergency care. The Lisa Calagrassi Foundation. Learn more at lisafoundation.org.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I am honored today to have as a guest the next half an hour, special guest, exoneree and advocate for those who have been wrongfully convicted and for social justice, Jeff Descovich. Jeff joins us from Washington, D.C. We're going to talk with Jeff later. Hi, Jeff. How are you? Thank you for coming on again.
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, so Jeff and I are going to listen with all of you to some of the clips of Skylar Richards' interview, especially where she discussed the burning of her child. Let's listen.
Tell me about the fire. What fire? Well, there's some evidence to show that there was some burning on her.
Did you burn her? I promise on anything I didn't burn her. My dad has lots of bonfires, but I didn't burn her.
There was some charring and stuff on some of her bones, so.
I didn't burn her.
Are you sure?
I swear on anything.
You're sure?
That I'm sure of. I'm sure of.
You didn't did you burn anything around her? Did you try to maybe melt the dirt or anything? Was there any reason for any of that?
No, and I did nothing with fire. Nothing.
Is it possible originally you put her in the fire pit before you?
No.
I don't mean with a lit fire, but you put her in the fire pit.
No.
What about, maybe not fire, what about some other heat source? Was there any heat involved in anything? This was after she was dead, so it's not like no microwaves, no oven, no nothing.
You're so close. Just give us all the truth that's left.
I'm giving you all the truth. I told you about squeeze the trigger. I think that it might have hurt her, but that I
think it's not. Did you maybe put some, after she was in the ground, maybe some fire there, or
I took flowers from the fire pit.
But that wouldn't burn the bones unless they were on fire.
Not that. You're so close, Skylar.
We know there was some sort of fire. I know it's.
And I understand that.
She was probably alive just a little bit.
Maybe I thought I saw her chest where I was cleaning up, and I don't know if I.
And I'm not trying to get you to say maybes or anything. Just please share the truth with us.
Why did she make a noise?
Make a noise? What kind of noise?
Maybe a little noise, a girl, but I didn't know if it was something else, and then I didn't hear another one.
Another one? Okay, which is natural, because that's what. Again, I'm not a mom, but I've been in the delivery room for 4 of them, and there's kind of a gurgle sound, and the doctors will suction out.
Yeah,
that stuff.
I didn't hear it again.
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear it again.
Okay.
Was that when she was in the toilet, or was that when you were sleeping?
I think. No, that was when she was in the toilet. I might have moved, but I didn't look right away. I was in shock. I
understand.
Yeah, a baby just fell out of you.
I saw her arm maybe a little bit. Moving along.
Was that also when she was in the toilet, or was that?
Yeah, I think. And I picked her up and don't move.
The defense called a wrongful confession, coerced confession expert, Professor Alan Hirsch. Let's listen to a little bit of what he educated this jury on.
And to make that assessment, what materials did you look at?
Primarily, the videotaped interrogations. I've also read a psychological report.
Did I ask you when I retained you to give me a certain opinion?
Of course not, and if you had, I would have hung up. You asked me to give you an honest assessment.
And what is your assessment?
The officers in the July 20th interrogation of the defendant used a very aggressive version of the Reed technique.
Can you explain that to the jury?
So right at the outset, they told Schuyler that with medical scientific certainty, her account where the baby was stillborn was false. That is standard confrontation. And then they advanced any number of minimization themes. They led on that the main purpose of this interrogation was a burial for the baby, a proper burial. They told her that they knew she didn't harm the baby deliberately. They said that she had been alone and in shock. These are all fairly typical minimization themes, but they went beyond that. They made two statements that I found particularly problematic. Lieutenant Fain said to her, "It's not as if we're suddenly going to jump up and judge you and say you're going to jail." And Detective Carter said to her, "You just tell us everything and then we can move on." Both of these comments indicate that the suspect will receive zero punishment if she confesses. Not a light sentence, not a benign treatment, but zero punishment. And that is an extreme and particularly troubling minimization tactic.
And that's it problematic, in your view, for what reason?
Because it can break down an innocent person and lead him or her to confess.
Of Schuyler, and I believe I'm referring to the second interrogation, July 20th. Was there anything in particular about that interrogation that bothered you? And I'm referring to gurgle, the word gurgle. Can you?
Yes.
And what's troubling about that?
It's a subset of a broader phenomenon where there were several examples where Schuyler seemed to echo language or information that had been given to her by the interrogators, and that's perhaps the most obvious example. Lieutenant Fain suggested to her more than once, "The baby gurgled, did the baby gurgle?" which is a somewhat unusual notion, at least to me. And later on, Schuyler says, "The baby gurgled." And we find this in many cases of proven false confessions. We see instances where the suspect has basically spat back information or ideas that was supplied by law enforcement.
You said that you're not a psychologist and you do not evaluate defendants to determine their particular susceptibility. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But are you familiar with the literature that tells us about the susceptibility of certain populations or types of people?
Yes, I am.
Can you summarize that for us, please?
There are certain populations.
Go ahead and answer.
Thank you, Your Honor. There are certain populations, young people are among them, people with mental illness are among them, that are particularly susceptible. They're overrepresented in the universe of false confessors. And there are certain individuals who are suggestible. That's what they're called. They can be evaluated for this. They're deemed particularly prone to be broken down.
By authority figures?
By authority figures, even if innocent.
Was this a false confession? Well, no better a person to discuss with us is the defense right than Jeff Descovich. He was spent nearly, 2 decades in jail for a murder he did not commit, partially because as a teenager he was interrogated, he falsely confessed, and he's here to tell us what the truth is. So, Jeff, is this a compliant, coerced confession?
Yeah, this is a coerced compliant confession. So there's two types of false confessions. There's a coerced compliant, where the suspect knows that they're innocent, but they're being coerced to go along. And then there's the internalized false confession, which is when the person being questioned comes to doubt their own innocence. This is clearly not a internalized false confession, because there's a portion when she's questioned and she is adamant that she did not use any, she did not set the body on fire.
But then she later does that. So do you find that this confession is, number one, contaminated? Is it problematic that the police were giving her the answers on it? And is there any uncertainty in her words that tells you this is a false confession?
Yeah, there's all three. So it is contamination. So briefly, contamination means when the police give the suspect facts. So they're supposed to ask open-ended questions so that when the suspect gives details, it'll be clear that they have guilty knowledge rather than they're repeating something that's already been in the public domain or that they've been told. So one example here in this interrogation of contamination is the police say to her, tell me about the fire. And she replies, what fire? She then says, well, there's some evidence to show that there was some burning on her. So here, instead of asking an open-ended question, they've told her that. So that's an example of contamination.
What about uncertainty? What about uncertainty?
Yeah, sure. So there are 13 different examples within this interrogation of uncertainty. I'm just going to pick the most obvious three. So a question. So how long do you think that she was in the water? Answer, I don't remember. Now, somebody who committed a crime knows the answer to that. Another one. Question. So what part of the remains? Like, did you start like at the bottom, the top? Answer, I think the bottom. Question. Was it dark? Answer, I think it was like in the middle of the night. So someone making up a story, somebody lying, albeit under coercion, they don't know what actually happened, and so they kind of hedge in their language to give themselves some space so that if they do get something wrong, they have the, well, I told you I think, as opposed to saying something in the definitive. But somebody who's actually committed a crime, they know exactly what they did and what they didn't do. So that's as to uncertainty. And both contamination and uncertainty are definitely red flags that have appeared in other cases that have ended in DNA exoneration, the convictions of which were caused by coerced false confessions.
And what about the police giving her the answers in their question? Do you find examples of that?
Yes, exactly. Yes, there's 13 examples. Excuse me, there's 14 examples of that. In this case, again, I'll pick the top three. So question. So is it possible that because you were on the toilet when you had her? Okay, it is. So that's the question. Answer, yes. Another one. What part of the remains? Like, did you start like at the bottom, the top? Answer, I think the bottom. Question. You just like the lighter on the feet or something? Answer, yes. Then one more. Was it just like a cigarette lighter? Answer, just a lighter at my house. So they're giving her answers incorporated into her questions, and then she's latching on to the item. So with all of these numerous examples, to me, this is pretty clear cut that this is a coerced false confession.
So, Jeff, we're going to continue this conversation and look at more from the defense experts when we come back with our other two lawyers and Jeffrey Descovich. Stay tuned.
All right, crew, let's get started. Sure.
Don't ignore the law. You must call 811 at least 2 to 3 days before any digging project so you can avoid hitting our essential buried utilities. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811.
How I define making? In the broadest possible terms, it is making something extant in the world that didn't exist. Everybody who's ever made anything is bringing something into fruition for a reason, and that act in and of itself makes us stewards of our culture. It's something that we're talking about. It's a response. Actually, it's telling a story. That's really what it is. And I include everything that could be made: painting, sculpture, welding, all of that.
Yellow is positive.
When a kid gets their hands on the world and learns that they can make their fantasy play, that they can make their reality, that's power. And as far as I'm concerned, everyone should feel that kind of power. There we go. If there's something that interests you to bring into the world, that's fantastic. Go figure out how to do it. Go tell your own story. There it is. And so I want to know why you make. Let's go.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
We believe in patriotism. We believe in our nation's youth. We believe veterans earn their benefits through their service to our nation. We believe in a strong national security. We believe in our country. For 100 years, veterans have been impacting our nation through the American Legion, and we believe it makes a difference. If you believe, learn more at legion.org/webelieve.
Anyone can fall victim to moving fraud. Know your rights and responsibilities.
We had really signed off on a price, and that was about it.
Without a signed written estimate, movers may try to charge more.
They were charging us now $2,000 instead of the agreed upon $900.
And may hold your items hostage until you pay.
Not only had they roughly handled or mishandled, it seemed like they had purposely destroyed things.
Visit protectyourmove.gov to download a free moving fraud prevention guide. Search for registered movers and view their complaint histories. Move with confidence.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We're going to now listen to Dr. Bassman, who was on the stand earlier today talking about Skylar Richardson being a susceptible type of person for a false confession. Let's listen.
And Doctor, specifically, what information in the interrogation videos stand out to you with regard to your opinion?
In terms of what stands out to me about what I observed, what I read, transpired in the interrogation, was a clear sense of intimidating, attempting to convince Skylar to implant a memory, implant an interpretation of facts in such a way that would incriminate her. And what's most sad about this is Skylar, because of her personality disorder, is not able to protect herself. She was not able to defend herself. So Skylar, because of her personality disorder, has a very difficult time confronting those in authority. She has a very difficult time speaking up for herself. She lives in a state of denial where if you would see her on the outside, you would see a smiling girl, but on the inside, she's emotionally crumbling. So at any sort of confrontation, she disintegrates. What I observed is here were two interrogators who took her hand. Here is a young girl who's in a very vulnerable situation, who's under extreme stress, who doesn't know what's going on, who in a sense has learned to believe that the police, the authorities are there to protect her, to keep her safe. And by taking her hand, and by continually using leading questions, leading statements, they attempted Skylar to say things that she knew were false.
Judge Wilcott, I'd like to bring you in. Question to you. I think if I look at this, this is a compliant, coerced confession. How come judges don't, on Miranda, throw these things out?
Because they turn it over to the jury to determine whether or not it's truthful or not. So instead of throwing it out, they pass it along to the jury. And this is true nationwide, Linda.
And is it a problem, Anthony?
Yeah, in California it's a problem. So, and
have you dealt with this before? Have you had a case that's exactly what happened? The judge refused to throw it out. I can tell you, as on the wrongful chair for a while, a co-chair of the Criminal Convictions Committee, Wrongful Convictions Committee in New York, I couldn't even get this out for everyone to agree.
That's a big problem.
Jeffrey Deskovich, how many of these wrongful confessions are there out there? You are now a lawyer. Thank you for being a lawyer after all you've done, and congratulations. Please tell us, give us a little bit of your education.
Sure. So I have a master's degree from John Jay
Oh,
College.
I don't mean that. I mean in terms. I know you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry. That was my fault to ask you that. How many wrongful confessions are there out there? What's the literature showing?
Yeah, the literature shows that 25% of the DNA-proven wrongful convictions were caused by false confessions. I want to quickly add that particularly vulnerable populations are people with mental health issues as well as youth, which both of those elements are present in this case.
Well, we just heard about holding her hand. Let's listen to the cross-examination by the prosecutor to Dr. Bassman about whether the cops were being nice to her by holding her hand.
And you watched those interviews, correct?
Yes, I did.
Because you made reference to them, and I assume you're referring to the female detective, Detective Carter, taking her hand?
Yes.
Are you aware that in every instance where the hand-holding occurred, it was initiated by Miss Richardson?
Am I aware that Schuyler is the one who took Miss Detective Carter's hand?
Yes.
I focused more, not so much on Schuyler taking the officer's hand, but by the officer holding her hand. Because to me, that's a violation of a boundary. That's a violation.
Even though Miss Richardson's asking if she can hold her hand?
Yes. Because as someone in a position of authority, especially, it's important to set boundaries, especially with a very vulnerable person, because it, in a sense, reflects that you're safe. It reflects that, in a sense, I'm like your mother. You, a few moments ago, had asked me, who does she trust, who does she rely on the first, or the most, and you even indicated her mother and her boyfriend. So here's someone who is acting in the role of a mother. So of course, Sky is going to extend herself.
And you saw when Detective Carter said, can I have my hands are cramping up, and she let go of Schuyler's hands, and within a matter of minutes, Schuyler again, can I please hold your hands?
Exactly.
But that was initiated by Schuyler, correct?
Exactly. And that's synonymous. That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't. Because in a sense, Schuyler needs that reassurance. She needs to be comforted because she's in intense pain, especially under periods of stress. But it behooves someone in authority to maintain a boundary.
Anthony Toll, do you believe this is a compliant, coerced, false confession?
I do. I do.
Judge Ashley Wilcott, do you believe this is a compliant, coerced, false confession?
You know, I do, and I'll tell you one of the reasons is that hand-holding to establish a trust with her that was outside of the boundaries. I agree with that testimony.
And Jeffrey Descovich, again, you have been through it. You are now a lawyer, you're an exoneree, you're an advocate for us. The defense, what are one of the areas they could cross-examine on to get rid of this? Let me just reach over here and hold my guest's hand to show him how much I like him.
Sure. Well, the one area would be, I mean, they're asking Schuyler questions to make it sound as though everything is understandable, which is coercive. But then another aspect is that she asks, you know, can I go home? And instead of them being clear with her, they imply that it's a possibility. And that element of wanting to go home is a classic sign that's present in many of these false confession cases.
And if you were advising the defense, you tell them to go on that. What else would you tell them to do, Jeffrey? Because, I mean, I think this is horrible.
Yeah, I would tell them that despite putting on the two experts, that I think it's critical that they put their client on the stand. The everyday citizens think that an innocent person would never confess, even though we gave the percentage already. I don't think it's enough to just rely on the experts. I think it's important to put your client on the stand and have her explain directly why she gave a false confession. And I also think it's critical for the defense to disprove as many elements of, as many of the statements in the confession as they can, even on minor points, just in order to be able to argue overall that the confession is coerced and false and therefore should not be relied on by the jury.
Jeffrey, you lived this. To me, I called you and you looked at all these tapes last night. I think that you are the most impressive advocate as to whether something is coerced. Have you ever testified in a courtroom as an expert on this, as to the elements of a coerced confession?
No, I haven't testified in the courtroom. I have reviewed confessions and given opinion to lawyers, though.
You are, it's just amazing, ladies and gentlemen. Jeffrey has a foundation, the Descovitz Foundation. He, as I said, he's now a lawyer. I thank you, Jeffrey, for coming on, spending all the time you did last night to review this such an important question. I hope you will come back with me again on the Law and Crime Network to explain and educate our viewers that these things happen every single day.
More than happy to. It's a wonderful program. I'm glad to share knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Ladies and gentlemen, Skylar Richardson, we will continue reviewing this case when we come back. Stay tuned. Law and Crime Network.
Hi, this is Jillian with Court Junkie, a true crime podcast that covers court cases and criminal trials. This week, we're covering the Jason Carter trial.
There's only 2 people in this world who know what happened on June 19, 2015. And one of them is dead, and the other one's sitting behind me.
You can listen to Court Junkie on lawandcrime.com, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
What would happen if I had to pick up the phone, call 911 for one of my family members or one of my neighbors? What would I do if no one was on the other end to respond? What if there was no 911? So you can be a part of the solution.
Anybody can be a firefighter. Male, female, younger, older.
We have school teachers. We have leaders in business.
Is me, you, anyone that wants to be.
There is no typical firefighter.
Everybody can make something, because I think everyone has a spark of creativity, and the reason that I have to keep making is because I don't think my life would be as fulfilling without it. If you make things yourself, that means you're not cowering in fear. You're out there taking chances. That, I think, is my way of saying I love you to the world. All right, now I want to hear why you make.
Share your own Why I Make story today. Visit whyimake.org.
Can I give you a hand?
Interstate moving is much more complicated than just moving within your city or town.
Anyone can fall victim to moving fraud.
Do not sign a contract without knowing who you're dealing with.
Do the research on the company that's physically doing your moving.
Do as much diligence as you can and document as well as you can.
Do Better Business Bureau searches. I would Google the company online.
And the best place to find information is through the U.S. Department of Transportation.
Learn how to protect your belongings. Visit protectyourmove.gov.
All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become 1 in a million.
Yes. Oh, hi. I suppose you're wondering what an A-list celebrity like me is doing in a place like this. You must know, I'm saving the world. Oh, hi, Beth. Yep, saving the world again. Did you know that 40% of all the food produced in the United States is thrown away? That means everything that went into that food, the pesticides, the water, the land, was all for nothing. Just look at this perfectly good food thrown in the trash. The pizza with extra Cheerios, these goldfish and Band-Aid tacos. And just look at this perfect trash burger. This pasta dog looks delicious.
You don't have to dumpster dive like Ed Begley Jr. to save the planet. Fight food waste by shopping smart and using what you buy before it gets trashed.
That's way better. Ooh, arugula.
Do your part and find out other world-saving tips at betterthaned.org.